Well, welcome, church history friends. My name is Barb Walden, and it's a joy to welcome our global storytellers and listeners from around the world today. Tonight's program is the sixth lecture in the 2021 Church History Without Boundaries lecture series, and it is sure to be a good one. Joining me today and throughout the series are two wonderful co-hosts, Joey Williams and Wendy Eaton. Joey serves as the Mission Center President for the Eastern and Western Europe Mission Centers. Welcome, Joey. In addition, Wendy's here behind the scenes, answering questions, dropping information in the chat, and solving problems that hopefully you in the audience never find out about. Wendy is the Administrative Assistant for the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation and the Joseph Smith Historic Site. Welcome, Wendy. I'm so glad you're here. Now, today's program is being recorded for those who are unable to see it live. We will record all of our online programs throughout the series, and you can locate these videos on our YouTube channel as well as our website. Wendy will drop the online lectures link in the chat if you're interested in viewing our collection of lectures. Our online lectures would not be possible without generous donors like you, our friends in the audience, which is another reason I am thrilled to share that the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation is beginning its fall campaign. The fall campaign includes a generous gift from our board of directors. Our board of directors is so committed to the mission and vision of the foundation that they are offering to double the first $10,000 received during the fall campaign. And that means if you give, say, $100 today, your gift will automatically be doubled to $200. A $1,000 gift will become a $2,000 donation, thanks to the generosity of our board of directors. Giving to the fall campaign will support the ongoing maintenance and preservation of all 5 Community of Christ historic sites. It will help us continue offering online programs like tonight's lecture. It supports the development of new educational resources, funds young adults in the Alma Blair internship program, and so much more. Wendy has dropped the online donation link and mailing address in the chat. Thank you for your consideration and support, friends. Our friends over at the Project Zion podcast are continuing to interview guest speakers from past lectures, including a number of those in the Church History Without Boundaries series. They just released an intriguing interview that follows up on the lecture, The Life and Legacy of Apostle Kasuku Tsukini. Andrew Bolton, Jewel Bolton, Philip Caswell, and Darlene Caswell sat down with Karen Peter and reflected on their personal experiences with Apostle Tsukini. It's a great continuation of the October 14th lecture, so be sure to check it out. The link is included in the chats and on the screen. And that's it for my announcements today. Lachlan Mackay is also here with us this evening to share about opportunities at the historic sites in 2022. So I'll turn things over to Lach. Welcome, Lach.
Hello, friends. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us from Australia today. I just want to talk about a couple of opportunities to serve at historic sites. Our plan is to reopen in March of 2022, and we are looking for volunteers, historical interpreters, folks interested in maintenance, whether that be painting or plumbing or landscaping or mowing, working in the flower gardens, lots of opportunities to serve. We also need help with cleaning. So my email, lmackay@seaofchrist.org. Feel free to snap a photo of these slides if you want to reach out to me. So we're looking for volunteers at historic sites for the spring. We also have internship opportunities coming up, as well as a Heritage Plaza opportunity. I am looking for a couple who might be interested in volunteering at Heritage Plaza, who would be the team leads for that site, but also assist with caring for the temple and auditorium grounds. So weeding, landscaping kinds of things. Most of our visitors to Heritage Plaza come in July, which means there's lots of time to do other things. And so we hope to have somebody who would help with Heritage Plaza and help with the grounds. And then finally, again, internship opportunities for the summer. We're starting to recruit now. These are paid positions. We're looking for 12 young people. We provide on-site housing, and they can earn up to 6 hours of credit through Graceland University. Again, LMACKAY at seaofchrist.org. I'd love to talk to you. These internships are great ways to keep young people connected to the church, strengthen the bond to the church. Many of our current leaders, whether the congregation or mission center or world church level, were introduced or really immersed in the church through these historic sites internships. So would love to talk to you about those opportunities. Well, thank you for the few moments to share. Back to Barb.
Well, thank you, Locke. And that officially ends our announcements for this evening. So I'll turn things over to our wonderful host, Joey, to begin tonight's program. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Barb. Well, today we get to explore Community of Christ history in Australia. So who better to share that than Ben Smith? Ben will be speaking to us from Australia today and comes to us with his own unique history as a seventh generation member of Community of Christ. Ben is passionate with his witness to the mission of the church. He has a BA in community development, and Ben began employment with the church in Perth, Western Australia, serving as a congregational support minister. He then moved back to Melbourne in the same role and was then appointed Mission Center President of the Australia Mission Center in 2017. He resides on the Mornington Peninsula with his wife Lana and daughter Pippa. Ben's passion and hope for the church is that we may live our fullest selves, and he means by that to become a true community of Christ. While not a lover of traditional history topics, he does love a good story, and he is coming to learn that these are one and the same. Ben's lecture today is entitled Green Shoots, Tiona and the Green Cathedral, From Inception into Tomorrow, a continuing legacy of camping ministry and sharing the sacredness of creation. Welcome, Ben. If we were giving awards in this lecture series, you would have gotten the award for the longest lecture title. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Joey. I'll take that award.
Well, we are very excited to hear your presentation this evening, so I'll turn things over to you as you share history from your part of the world.
Well, thank you. And it is such a pleasure to be with all of you today. As Joey said, I love to tell a story. And there are so many stories about Tiona and the Green Cathedral that we can share. And I've tried to distill them, a few of them, and a little bit of its history into today. But first, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. It's a tradition that we do here in Australia. And today, during our experience, I sit on the land of the Bunurong people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present and emerging, and all Aboriginal and Indigenous elders of other communities who may be here today. May we learn from your wisdom and share ours as we walk together to build this world of peace. A distant kookaburra call, the rustle of palm leaves in the ocean breeze, the golden sun rising from a distant watery horizon, a walk along the broad beach sands or up the brooding mountain at the southern end of the beach, a time of quiet prayer and reflection in the Green Cathedral beside the lake. The sounds of human activity stirring, these are the beginnings of a new day at Tiona Reunion on the New South Wales coast. Those are the words of Brother Jack Imrie in Restoration Studies Volume 6, published in 1995. They so aptly describe and beautifully describe what you might expect to experience at Tiona Reunion, even today. But first, I know that many of you may not know where Tiona is, or I know that many of you have probably traveled there, and some on this call are even living there. But first, I'd like to just get our bearings as to where Tiona is. a 3.5-hour drive north of Sydney, you'd come across a road to the right of the main highway. You turn there, drive a little way and around a bunch of bends, you land here in Zion. Tiona is the Tahitian word for Zion, a place which has been there since the world was breathed into, a place we find ourselves being custodians, and a place many call their spiritual home. Tiona is a place where God has always been, and we now cherish it as a central part of the church's mission in Australia. Today, I'm not going to spend a real amount of time on how the church in Australia was founded and settled, other than to say just a couple of words, in that it was early missionaries in 1840 and 1841 who were the first to win converts in South Australia. But then a little bit later, more seriously, in 1874, when Claude Roger and Charles Wesley Wandle arrived on the newly repaired Domingo after its hiatus in Tahiti due to a water leak. They didn't waste any time in Tahiti, let me say. In their 100 days there, they were able to start the church in Papeete and a few other places on the northern side of the island. When they arrived here, they got straight to work with their earlier contacts. The church was slow to expand at first. And my own personal connection goes back to I've written it down, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was baptized by Claude Roger in 1875. I don't remember that day, mind you, but here we are today. In about 1875, Wandle passed away due to poor health. And it was a little bit of time after that where the church slowly expanded. And it was large enough by 1902 to begin holding district conferences and annual reunions over Easter at Broadmeadow in New South Wales, just outside of Newcastle. It was here where a reunion was extended by a week, the story goes, because the saints were so keenly interested in hanging on every word of the then President Alexander Smith. I doubt that would happen today, more due to logistics than interest, but needless to say, he had an impact and the Spirit was working indeed in that place at that time. By 1904, this gathering had moved a little north to a town called Bulahdelah after the church building was completed there. And there were gatherings held there until about 1923, when Tiona was established. But let's recap just a couple of years before that. In 1921, the Australian Mission Conference authorised a committee to, quote, look for a suitable location for the erection of conference buildings and reunion grounds. A committee was established, and the next year that committee recommended a site adjacent to another church member's property between Wallace Lake and the ocean. The minutes of that meeting recall there was much discussion and the recommendation was approved. In the year or two to come, plans were developed and a working committee began to develop the site. In that time, the church didn't really have the finances to acquire the land itself. So there was a limited company established and shares were purchased for 10 shillings by members, or about $1. The company held the property for about 25 years before a conflict arose between officers of the church, forcing other members to purchase those shares and then eventually vote to transfer the property to the church where it sits today. The first reunion was held in December 1923, having only begun planning in November of that year. So my friends, there is still time to plan this year's reunion. However, last year and this year, we've had to cancel this reunion due to COVID restrictions. In that year of 1923, there were some 300 participants there with classes, devotions, worship and recreation being held. This was nearly 50 years after the first missionaries arrived in New South Wales. The next month would have been 50 years. Reunions were an event. We're now only 2 years away from celebrating our 100th anniversary of Tiona Reunion, and it will be an event, let me tell you. So I'll be looking out for all of your registrations. We'll include a link below. No, we haven't quite got that far yet, but we will let you know. In that time, 100 years ago, the events were held in a tent just up the rise from the Green Cathedral, which hadn't been built at this point, which over the years, this tent had been destroyed, repaired, re-erected, replaced several times due to storms and degradation, and eventually it was completely destroyed in 1977. There was a basic track to Tiona from Bulahdelah, but the main access was by train from Taree in the north, then a hire car to Tuncurry, and then the final 10 miles being completed by the launch ferry. The jetty you see here in this image was established for this purpose. It was built on the lakeside, and it was used frequently to bring people and supplies to the grounds. Everything that they needed came via this method, aside from a couple of things that took a little bit longer. Just want to show you a couple of images from that time that really show, I guess, the conditions. This was when the tent was destroyed. That stage is no longer there. It's made way for a new chapel that I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But this was the location. This is the dining hall and the kitchen area, which was added in 1925. Wonderful conditions, I'm sure, for the time. It looks quite amazing. On the beach side, there was many activities held, including carnivals and races. And this is a picture of the lifesavers, or members who were lifesavers. And at that point in time, I doubt there was any qualification for that other than to be able to swim. And that is in 1932. Some years later, with the support and encouragement of Apostle George Mesley, in December of 1939, a rambling path through the palm trees was cleared, along with a space for worship and reflection. In that flat space, seats were made eventually from logs of trees, and a natural cathedral was born. Stones were collected from around the area and assembled along the path, and others were collected to make an altar. That altar still sits there today. By the end of 1940, the space was assembled and was able to be used by about 150 people. And a dedication of the space was held on December 29 in 1940. So constant has been the call to respect and embrace the sacredness of creation in this space. And it is really a credit to the vision of that space that it is still so relevant for us here today. That connection is illuminated by this space. And the language spoken by people as they enter is the same language spoken by the Hebrew prophets when they utter the name of God. It's simply an inward and an outward breath. Now, the Green Cathedral hosts hundreds of events every year, most years, with worship weekly, weddings and funerals on very regular occasions, and freely open for private reflection. It is very popular among tourists to the area because of its uniqueness and beauty, and I believe because of the spirit that resides here, and it engages with people without hesitation. Just adjacent to the Green Cathedral, as you walk along the edge of the lake, you find a small children's chapel, which is a small replica of this space, and a campfire circle. Although these spaces have fallen into slight disrepair over the years, and there are plans afoot to reimagine and restore the spaces in the near future. Skipping a few years now, in the early 1970s, just as the main road through the site was to be sealed, plans were developed for a new conference centre at the northern end of Tiona. Like all things in the church, including plans to build this conference centre, time seemed no issue. And it wasn't until 1979, in the November of that year, that the completion of the centre occurred. The camping experience in Australia and across the land, not just at Tiona, has been a sacred experience. They have been seen as opportunities for focused learning, sharing, and for all kinds of pilgrimage of the diaspora of the saints to gather together to be in a larger community. Just like many places around the world, the gatherings that we had in congregations and in areas were often quite small. And so when people came together for these opportunities, it was embraced wholeheartedly. Reunions in particular have been a highlight. And the time of year, particularly at Tiona, over the years, has been a popular time for families to get away together. And it is now a tradition for many families to have their holiday, their annual holiday together at Tiona Reunion. Indeed, in the 1980s, this was the case for over 500 people when the camp needed to be split into 2 back-to-back events to cater for the numbers. Hundreds of camps, retreats, events, and conferences have been held at Tiona. With those gatherings, various developments have been made, including cabins, a conference centre, a hall for cooking, a lodge, and more recently, further cabin developments, glamping tents, and soon a redevelopment of the conference centre and a new chapel will be completed. In recent decades, maintenance and costs of running the campgrounds escalated. And it was in 2004, the church decided to sell the management and the development lease of the grounds to an external party who managed the property until 2017, when it was sold again and on-sold again in 2019. The decision to sell the management of the campground was painful for many because it was a new experience and it was felt like we had sort of let go of the ownership of the place. But it was necessary in order to maintain the actual ownership and use of the facility. It has presented many new opportunities for development, which also come with restrictions about when we can use it, but also the facilities are much improved and there's a much greater offering as what we were having back in those days. Currently, the relationship with the lease owner is extremely positive, and there are new plans and development plans in place at the moment, which we are jointly working on into the coming years so that the grounds are relevant for the community in the years to come. I've kind of sped through much of that history, but it moves me to the current day. If I had more time, we would be able to fill some of those gaps between 1923 and 2021 with more stories and testimonies from the thousands of individuals who have stepped foot on these shores, who have been restored by the grace of God who abides here. And yet I must leave you to explore those stories with the people and discover them when you come here. In the meantime, I want to tell you about this dream for now. This image here kind of shows a little bit of the jetty that remains, the pylons for the jetty that remains out in the lake. There are actually plans to build the jetty again into the future, in which we're working with the current lease owners on, which would be a beautiful thing. In 2006, only 15 years ago, although it feels like a lot, maybe not that long ago, but when you put it in those terms, it was quite a while ago, the Green Cathedral Ministries congregation was formally established, a signal to the community that we are extending the church's mission and presence in this space. Since that time, there has been a dream to build another facility on the adjacent area near the Green Cathedral as a companion to host gatherings in bad weather. For those of you who have been to the Green Cathedral, moments like this are quite common. But there are also moments where taking a picture is a dangerous thing. The wind which lashes the shore. In fact, in the last 2 years, the Green Cathedral has experienced significant threats from fire, from flood, and now we live in a pandemic. And yet, on moments like this, it's all kind of worth it. But to host events in weather that is a little challenging is near on impossible. And so we have a dream to build a facility just adjacent. And I want to just share a quick video with you now, which describes what that is and shows you a bit of a 3D image of what it looks like. So sit back and enjoy this little clip.
This space, it does something to me. It makes my shoulders relax. It makes my eyes drift to the horizon with no real conscious thought of doing so. It makes me recall memories, people. Each time I'm here at the Green Cathedral, I can't help but think about the generations that have gone before me and those who'll come after. Those who dreamed of a space where all people of all kinds and generations can meet the divine. They dreamed of a place where all you needed was a horizontal log and some humility. And now we stand here again, dreaming of a place just up that rise where we can meet at any time of the day, in any weather, to celebrate joy and love and lives lived, to tell the story time and time again of how we are blessed by the grace of God. But don't just take my word for it.
I have so many memories of the Green Cathedral. I grew up going there every single year. So it's meant something different to me every time, I guess.
The Green Cathedral is a very special place to me. I have been going to Tiona since I was 5 years old, and so many wonderful experiences, worship, gatherings, weddings, just times of reflection are part of my Green Cathedral experience.
For me, I walked the path of the Green Cathedral many times, and I find it each time it has its own, magic really, because it's a magical place. But there's been the sacrament of baptism and marriages and funerals, and each is its own experience, and yet it would be a very rare occasion where something wonderful didn't happen out of that. So I remember, I've had people share with me as they're prepared to make their covenant in marriage down there that they dreamed a dream of being there when they were a child and fulfilled that dream. And so when they're fulfilling a dream, somehow it touches my life and my spirit as well.
The open nature of the Tiona Chapel is designed to link you with the forest surroundings. Large glass sliding doors will open to courtyards either side of the sanctuary to allow for light, breeze and people to move organically throughout the space. Single-level polished concrete floors will make the building accessible for all. An office will offer a place for meeting, counselling and will be a base for ministry. Fully equipped bathrooms and a kitchen will complement the space. And it's now, after 15 years of dreaming, that the Tiona Chapel becomes real.
As the great author Khalil Gibran once wrote, "And though of magnificence and splendour, your house shall not hold your secret, nor shelter your longing, for that which is boundless in you abides in the mansions of the sky." Or in other words, this house is not for us to live in, but for us to share. It's an outward expression of love and grace and peace for the world to experience. This is our chance for us to share with the world that things like this aren't important because of their shine or their glitter, but rather the message they share about the world, about connection and community. This isn't a place for us to come to, it's a place for us to come from. Please join me in taking your part.
I hope you enjoyed that little clip to share about what the future looks like at Tiona and the Green Cathedral. It will partner with the Green Cathedral, won't replace it, and it will be a supplement to ministry in that area. The space will host events, worship, retreats, and also be the centre of ministry in that area. Tours will tell the story of the church and the Green Cathedral, and will offer the general public an opportunity to share in the sacred prayer for peace on a regular occasion. Spiritual formation retreats will be offered, along with unique opportunities to share in learning the gospel story. The present development has been held up a little bit due to various natural disasters, health, and now the pandemic with related global supply chain issues. But we hope to have the project complete in 2022. There is so much potential here. As was seen by the early missionaries, the sacredness of creation and the grace of God oozes from this space. We didn't have to do anything but to discover it for ourselves. We have great plans to continue to foster the personal connection with the divine in an open air cathedral. Some may wonder what the future of the church holds. I too have that wonder. But what I don't have any concerns about is that the relevance of Tiona and the Green Cathedral to the life of the community today and into the future. Its purpose to be a place of worship and private devotion remains an antidote to the wounds of the world today. And it warms my soul to know that many, many who seek its shade in the times of trial, they do that. On a fairly regular occasion, I'll be scrolling through Instagram like many people do, and I'll see that one of our young adults has posted that they're there. If you know young adults, nothing enters their Instagram feed unless it means something. So it's important to see our sacred places represented in those spaces. We here in Australia look forward to sharing more with you in the years to come as the dream that we have here comes to life. Just to close today, before we move into our time of questions, I do want to honour all of those disciples who have gone before me. There are so many people to credit, but in probably with risk, I want to name a couple. I want to credit the likes of people like Jack Imrie, David Johnson, and Margaret Morris in particular for their efforts to preserve the history and the story of Tiona over the years. Jack's love for Tiona is well documented, and it is cultural ancestors like him who I look for their dedication and witness to the Spirit's call in places like Tiona. Their sacrifices and contributions and their lives of service have been for God's work. People today, such as Wendy and Barry Ballard, Alan Walsh, members of the Tuncurry and Green Cathedral congregations, people like Jan and Rob Thompson, Julian Archer, Dione Jacker, and those who contribute to our camping ministries there. People like the Ungers and the Prescotts and all of those others who continue to contribute in many ways through our camps and retreats and fellowships. We have developed strong roots at Tiona, and now there are plentiful green shoots ready to prosper under the sun. May God's grace bless us as we be among them, is my prayer. Thank you. I look forward to taking any questions. And I see there's a couple in the box, and Joey's come back, and I'll skip a couple of slides here, Joey, and I'll put a nice one here at the end for us to focus on. This is the beautiful cabbage tree palm that surrounds that area in the littoral rainforest.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing all of your research on the history as well as the future of the Tiona reunion grounds and the Green Cathedral. Ben, you may not consider yourself a historian, but you are certainly a storyteller. And you might even be partly a real estate agent too. You certainly sold me on that chapel. So I loved your use of images that you used that gave us this real feel of the history as you told it, as well as the dream that you shared. And so we've come to that part in our program to answer any questions that any of you may have had that may have come up throughout Ben's presentation. And I see there's already several in the queue. So Barb, why don't you get us started with the first question?
I'd be happy to. The first is a comment from Susan Oxley. And Susan shares, Ben, share with us the process of baptisms in the lake.
I'd love to. Yes, it's a wonderful occasion when we have baptisms in the lake. There's been the off chance that we've sometimes had baptisms in the ocean too, in which there are a couple of amazing stories about whales breaching and eagles flying overhead as the persons come in and out of the water, which are incredible. But they're for another day. The lake side, though, the lake is actually very, if I can go back to one of the very early slides here, you can see here the top of the image. If I scroll maybe here, you can see my cursor. Around about here is the Green Cathedral, somewhere in there. Sort of to the left of the big black hole that you see there, which again is another story. But where that is it's a very shallow part of the lake. And so there's a lot of silty sand there. So you can walk out a long distance into that part of the lake. And so what happens is if we want to have a baptism that actually you want to see, rather than walking several hundred yards out to the lake, we dig a hole, some maybe, how far would it be? Maybe 20 or 30 meters, so maybe 100 feet out into the lake. We walk out there and someone gets the job. It's usually a man named Clinton Unger. And if you know Cass Unger, who's one of the employees here, it's her dad. He often gets the job of digging the hole, and you kind of got to do it really only not too long before the baptism, because the hole fills back in again. And so you dig the hole and it kind of refills itself if you've ever dug a hole in sand before. And then we put a little stick in the water so we can see where the hole is. And so the candidate and the person doing the baptism walk out to the lake, and the congregation walk to the lake's edge, because you really can't see much from those seats there. So you walk to the lake's edge, and it's just a beautiful moment where you've got all of these disciples on the lake's edge, and you've got this person or persons, often there's multiple baptisms at a time, in the lake, and the person has to kind of yell the prayer because you can't really hear it from that far. And so it's a beautiful, it is a beautiful moment. And often then the individuals come back to the lake's edge, sit on like a log, and sometimes the prayer of confirmation is offered straight away there. And it is often a really beautiful experience.
Thank you, Ben. Our next question is a comment from Susan Oxley, and she says, people also might be interested in some of the unique animals that live at Tiona: the goanna, the frogmouth owl, the snakes, and the insects.
Yes, there are the goannas that live on site are like a really big lizard. It looks like a dinosaur, and they'll often sort of be known to wander around the grounds and up trees and things. And yes, there's snakes in the summertime, mosquitoes all the year round, and obviously in the ocean side there are all of your normal sharks and things. So it's a true Australian experience. You come along to Tiona.
Our next question comes from Brenda Mitchell, and Brenda writes, the reunions of yesteryears had several hundred participants. Has that number changed in the last few decades?
It's a great question, Brenda. There in our last reunion, which was 2019, which I'll bring up the picture that I had there. There was, I think this reunion, there were about 150 to 200 people. It varies on different days, as many of our reunions do with visitors and things. But we've typically had somewhere between 100 and 200 most years. But occasionally there's a bit of a cycle of an on year and an off year because it attracts people from all over the country. And so people may not be able to afford to come every year, or the travel itself is quite onerous. So at this point in time, I would say our average is about 100 to 150 people every year. And then we might have a bumper year like we did in 2019, where there was about 200.
Esther Volz asks, what time of year are the reunions typically held?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Our reunion is held at Christmas time. So it used to begin just before Christmas. People would have Christmas Day there and then stay on for a week or so. Nowadays, with our world being a little bit more complex, we start on the 27th of December and we roll through till about the 2nd of January. So it's a week after Christmas. People kind of do their Christmas big lunches at home. And of course, we're in summertime. So everyone's at the beach enjoying that day. And then the following day, which is the 26th, our Boxing Day, which is a holiday. Often that's the day for travel, or for if you're in Melbourne, you will be going to the Boxing Day Test match, or sitting at home watching it on television, or the Sydney to Hobart yacht race starts that day. So there's a lot of sporting events in that calendar. So, but it does start around the 26th, 27th of December and runs through to the new year.
Our next question comes from Susan Oxley, and Susan asks, how have natural disasters impacted the lake, the palm trees, and the ecology of Tiona's natural beauty?
That's a really good question, Susan, and I think I may not be qualified to answer about the ecology, but I can say that we've had in the last few years a significant increase in various natural disasters around that space. You may have seen a couple of years ago, we had severe wildfires, bushfires in the region 2 years ago. And they were absolutely devastating. Between Taree and just north of Taree and Tiona, just millions and millions of hectares of bushland were destroyed and homes destroyed in those fires. And we were really concerned about the grounds, actually, because there were spot fires right around us. And at that reunion in 2019, there was a fire just nearby, and we were on high alert whether we would have to evacuate. And so the fire threat is real, and we have to do significant maintenance in order to maintain a safe grounds for fire, particularly under the palm trees there. In the video, you would have seen a lot of dead palm leaves on the ground, and we've actually cleaned up a lot of those in order to reduce the fuel load. But earlier this year, we had in the same region, like 1 in 100 year floods. And so it's like, this is the 1 in 100 year for kind of everything. So we've had, the Green Cathedral was underwater up to the, Wendy Ballard's on here. She might be able to comment in the chat box there. She's one of the pastors at the Green Cathedral congregation, and there were water, I believe, lapping up to the bottom of the log seats for about a day, and then it receded because it kind of coincided with a high tide. So that's always happening. We do believe if there is a significant increase in sea levels, say 0.5 meter to 1 meter, there is the potential that the Green Cathedral will experience significant flooding often. Right now, it's kind of not very often, but if sea levels rise, as is predicted, the Green Cathedral in 150 years' time may well be underwater. But that's kind of, it's on the lake's edge, right? So it's kind of a natural risk. But the chapel that we're building is up on the embankment quite some height away from the lake's edge. So that's going to be safe, but it may be a water view sooner than we believe. But that's probably all I can share. It's probably affected how the palms grow and the salinity of that space, but that's one for much later. There you go. Wendy does say that it was lapping the bottom of the seats. Strangely, it still had beauty to it, she says. Good for the washing of the feet exercise.
We're getting a lot of great questions, from church history questions to biology questions to environment questions. So keep those questions coming in, friends. Our next question comes from Dion Young, and Dion asks, what is the history of the name Tiona?
Yeah, well, that comes from the Tahitian name for Zion. So when Claude, Roger, and Wandel came, they had just been there. So I assume that there was this correlation, and I probably am safe to say that it was the palm trees that linked those two places for them, because when they were in Tahiti, they experienced this amazing, I guess, atmosphere and sacredness. And so for me, it probably comes back to the link between the people of that time, where they had just been. It probably reminded them of that space. That's my guess, but others may want to again respond in the chat box. Margaret Morris, who I mentioned, I think I saw her name on the participants list here. She may well be able to respond better in the chat box there as well about that history name. But that's my knowledge to this point.
Our next question comes from Justice Manning, and Justice asks, how close is the population or the people to the Green Cathedral? Do public activities interfere with worship experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question too. The town or the townships of Tuncurry, Foster and Tuncurry, which are just outside of Tiona, they're about depending on who's driving, it's somewhere between a 5 and 10 minute drive. It's probably safer at 10 minutes. And there's a wonderful community that lives there. We have several congregations in that area. And in the other direction, to the south, the Bulahdelah is probably the closest town, and that's more like a 45 to 50 minute drive from there. Foster Tuncurry, what we call kind of I think we call them border towns, but there's no border there. It's just either side of a river or the estuary there. And so one side of the bridge is Foster and the other side of the bridge is Tuncurry. If you ever come out here, you'll be able to see those spaces. And we have a beautiful chapel in Tuncurry right on the bridge there, which overlooks the entrance to the to the lakes. So that's probably how far it is away. So really, the public generally don't affect the worship experience, other than anybody who's visiting to view the Green Cathedral. So it's often the case where a visitor might decide to walk into the worship experience down the aisle because they want to take a picture on the lake's edge. There's been a number of reports and stories of people deciding to walk in the nude from one sort of side to the other side in the lake, maybe after having a couple of beverages that we wouldn't encourage. So there's been a number of stories of that kind of thing, but not very regularly from the general kind of public walking past.
Well, I think this is the first lecture where nudists have ever been mentioned. We're making history tonight. Our next question comes from Charles Greenberg, and Charles asks, for Floridians, the Southern Ocean water is cold, and he capitalizes every letter in the word cold with 2 exclamation marks, just for emphasis. Charles says, we remember getting sandblasted by the wind blowing the sand at the beach near Sail. How do you baptize in the ocean?
Yeah, well, Sail's a lot further south than Tiona, like a couple of days. So I live near, well, not really near Sail, but in the same area. So I would agree with you that the Southern Ocean is no place for any human body to go. However, this is on the northern, sort of mid-north coast of Australia. And so it's a lot higher on the closer to the equator, so it's much warmer in the Pacific Ocean, and so it is much kinder. And in the summertime, the water temperatures up there are quite beautiful. Many would say the wintertime is too, but and it is compared to where it is down in Sail or where I am on the peninsula. So yeah, it's you've got to be brave, and it is a surf beach as well. So it's not exactly the first choice, but for many on a calm day, it is stunning. It is a really beautiful place to be.
Our next question comes from Myra Elliott, and it's a request. She She writes, please tell us about youth camps.
Yeah, well, we hold youth camps there and have done for many years. In the recent times, it's been a little more challenging to have youth camps there, mainly because the majority of the youth that we have in Australia are at some distance from Tiona. So what we've often done is held a youth camp or a camping experience for youth just after reunion. So it's almost like, the recovery from reunion is at youth camp, and that's kind of the post reunion experience for the young adults and for the youth. So we often have our youth camps there, but also at our campgrounds down in Victoria, the Kalara campgrounds. At that space, it's a little more conducive to our youth experience, because at Tiona, it is now and has been for a long time a public campground. So we share the space with the general campers. If you're going there just generally as a random person who's booked a holiday there, we share that space with them. So it's a little more challenging to create the kind of environment we want to create at a youth camp in that time, in that space. Not impossible, but just a little bit more challenging. So we have had them plenty in the past.
Charmaine Unger comments that there are wonderful women's retreats held there, usually in March.
Absolutely, yeah. Our women's, I've never been to one, though I've been invited. I hear that they are an absolutely incredible experience for all those who attend. It is, for many, an incredibly powerful experience to be surrounded by people who care for one another and share the good news. I've heard so many, and that is such an important part of our ministry here in Australia. Our women's retreats are incredible.
Our next question comes from Rebecca Brown, and Rebecca asks, what is the relationship to the LDS like? Are the Community of Christ and LDS more accepting of, more connected to each other there?
I would say the relationship doesn't really exist all that much. In that the LDS Church here is enormous in comparison, and so there is not a whole lot of activity between. It's really just a personal connection that some people have in some areas. I know that Rick Sarr, who's on the participants list here tonight, he shares a number of relationships with people in his area and his line of work, and so it's probably more of a personal connection than a denominational connection. Having said that, our head office for the church, or our mission centre office, is in West Pennant Hills in New South Wales, just near Sydney. And the Sydney temple for the LDS is just around the corner. And so it's a bit coincidental, some might say, that they're close together there, but there are no real activities between the two denominations here. But there's no animosity either in saying that. It's just quiet.
Well, our last question of the night comes from Patty Bacon. And Patty asks, what is the shape and size of the new chapel you're planning? How many can it seat?
That's a great question, Patty. The chapel itself we were under significant restriction for the chapel and its size, its shape, because really the local shire really didn't want us to build it. Because that area is a literal rainforest. It's heavily protected. It's bordered by national parks and state parks. And so it is really quite a sensitive area. And there were some political people at the time that didn't really want us to build it because they didn't like us. And so we had to really fight hard to build any sort of building. And so what we actually were able to do is establish what's called, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's basically continual use or pre-existing use, because the mission tent was a somewhat permanent structure from, as we saw, from the 1920s right through to 1977. The footprint of that tent was all we could use. And so basically it's a very strange footprint because it's literally the shape of the tent. And so it's quite small. In metric, it's about 20 meters by about 10 meters, roughly. And that's not quite the right thing, but it'll seat about 50 people comfortably, standing well over that. But that's kind of the capacity for the building. The shape of the building, though, whilst it might look sort of rectangular from the footprint, the actual shape of the building is inspired by the palm leaf as we sit under the palms in the Green Cathedral. As you look up, it is quite a spectacular view. And so from the top of the building, the architect who designed the space kind of referenced this palm leaf. And his story when he was meeting with us and presenting us his design was that he went and sat in the Green Cathedral, and when he looked up, he was just so impressed that the shape impressed him. And he said he wanted to create the building in the shape of that palm leaf because he felt as he sat there on those benches that the palm leaves hanging over the congregation was kind of like the hand of God resting upon them. And so I kind of love that inspiration. And so for me, the sort of shape as it kind of ramps back up toward the back part there, that's reminiscent of that palm leaf.
And that wraps up the questions for the evening. Thank you, Ben. I'll turn things over to Joey.
Yeah, thank you once again so much, Ben, for sharing about Tiona's history and its future. And thank you to all of you, our friends in the audience, for joining us today, for your continuing passion for a good story, and for your generous support of the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation. I encourage all of you to tune in once again next week for our final lecture in the Church History Without Boundaries lecture series, when Pete Gaffney will tell us all about Community of Christ history in England in a lecture entitled The Morbid Spirit of Revolution, a reevaluation of early Latter-day Saint conversions in England. Wendy has already dropped a link to the Church History Without Boundaries webpage in the chat. Be sure to click on that link to register for next week's program, which you all remember begins at 12 p.m. Central next week. So until next Thursday, take care, everyone. Keep reading your church history and have a great day or evening wherever you may be.